Hi, this is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. In this program, I wanted to discuss the relationship between Maoism-Third Worldism and what one might call living a full and fulfilled life. And basically what I'm going to do is talk about it in relationship to myself, although I think that it can be extrapolated from myself to others as well, perhaps. What I have found is that since I have returned to Maoism-Third Worldism back in June, my life is simply fuller than it was before. I'm not really at all sure why that is. I would assume that there is some kind of reason for it, but what that reason is, I don't know. But the life that I was leading before I became a Maoist third worldist for the second time, not the first, but the second time, was a life of comfort. I am fortunately a wealthy man. Not that I want to be wealthy. I really wish I were not. Being comfortable is one thing. Being wealthy is quite another. And I really don't feel I deserve the wealth I have when so many people who live in the third world are suffering and dying in poverty. And right now, again, my thoughts return to the people of Palestine who are now being killed by the Israeli Defense Forces. It is a real tragedy that so many people in the world are not living a full life. Indeed, I think one could argue that they are really not living a life at all, at least not what I would call a life. Their lives are desperate. They are hungry. They have no place to sleep that is secure from bombs. They are alienated from their families, from their jobs, from themselves, ultimately. They literally have no place to go. Do you know people like that? I know many people who are in that situation. They feel like there might as well be no tomorrow. And if there is a tomorrow, there is no hope, no guarantee that life will change at all from the way it is today. The fact that I am in the situation I am in is a real blessing to me. And again, I know I don't deserve it. There are a lot of people in this world who are much more deserving of living the life that I now lead than I have deserved. But after becoming a Maoist third worldist, here's what has happened that has suddenly put me at a sense of peace with the world that I did not have before. Although I always knew that people in the third world were suffering, were unhappy, much more so than people that I know, by and large, I really never saw any way out of it for them. How could they for example, lead a full life. And if they could not lead a full life, then how could I lead one? And so from that perspective, I always felt as though my life was missing something. I was never quite sure what that was. I always felt as though someday I would figure it out. But that someday never seemed to happen. And it's not that I was desperate. No, I wasn't desperate. Again, I lived or have lived a long, successful life. And it put me into a very favorable situation in my retirement years that I'm in right now. I never expected that to happen. My child psychiatrist, for example, told my parents, he never told me, my parents eventually told me, I believe it was my mother, that I would most likely spend my entire life living on disability, based upon the fact that I was autistic, which back then was referred to in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, version 1, which is what I was diagnosed under, as schizophrenia of childhood and adolescence. They thought I was schizophrenic. They thought autistics in general were schizophrenic, that we couldn't distinguish reality from illusion. And I assumed that's the reason why he thought that I would spend my life living on disability, which is SSI in the United States, supplemental security income, which comes out of the Social Security budget. But fortunately, he was wrong. And I did lead a successful life economically and in other ways as well. But still, my life was not completely full. There was something missing. And again, I think it had to do with looking around the world and seeing so many people suffering and asking if they are in such desperate straits, what right do I have to be happy? And I couldn't think of one. Now, that's not to say that I was generally unhappy. That would not be true. Generally, I did okay, especially over the last 20, 25 years. My autism is barely noticeable to anyone. It is noticeable to me inside of my head, but most people would look at me and would not guess that I was autistic. And for the most part, autism really doesn't affect me that much either. But still, until June, I felt as though I was not leading a fulfilled life. So, once I returned to Maoism-Third Worldism, and I began to once again look at the third world in a different way, rather than see them as simply victims of Western colonialism, of Western imperialism, of Western hegemony, which indeed they are, I began to see them as the hope of humanity. That if the first world dies off, if we in the first world kill ourselves off, and there are so many ways in which we can conceivably do that, then I think that the third world will be there as a kind of new race of humanity, a kind of new people to lead humanity forward. Even when we in the first world have failed so miserably at bringing about anything resembling economic justice. When we in the first world have been the champions of the capitalist world system, as Emanuel Wallerstein has referred to it, the third world has stood by, victimized by that capitalist world system, impoverished by that capitalist world system. And again, I've seen that firsthand in my own journeys to the third world. So now, because of that new sense of awareness that I have cultivated in my life, I can now look at the third world in a somewhat different way than I did before, and now see them as a source of hope, as a center of hope in the world. And at least for all the suffering that people in the third world continue to endure at the hands of their first worldist overlords, at some point, and I hope that point is soon, and I believe it will be soon. I can't prove that. I can't even prove it to myself, but I believe it. Some kind of an inner sense that I can't really entirely understand. But I do believe that the third world will have its time. The time that we in the first world have wasted will now be their time to repair the damage that we in the first world have done, whether it's to the economy, to the climate, or whatever else. And I believe they will take that responsibility seriously. And I don't say that just as speculation, although I guess it is partially speculation. But I say that based upon meeting and interacting with people in the third world, and they just give me a sense of confidence. So when I say that Maoism-Third Worldism is the answer, or maybe to be a bit metaphysical, is the secret to a full life, that's what I mean. Recognizing that for all of the failures that we first worldists have had, there's always that third world, which hopefully, and I believe will, arise to rescue us. This has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.